Thank you for joining us. We are Finding God in Video Games, and in today's episode, we are wrapping up our Dreams Interrupted series with a preview of a piece of technology that has been a long time coming. Some would even say that it is painfully overdue.
Yeah, most of the time when I think of gaming events and some of these announcement things that occur, I think of games, I think of consoles, maybe new services. Don't normally think of gaming peripherals as something that's going to be the most exciting news that comes out of an event. But at this year's Gamescom event, that absolutely was what happened. It wasn't a game, it was a better way to play them. Mere weeks after announcing their new and exciting partnership with Backbone to create a mobile phone controller that was based off the styling of the PlayStation 5 DualSense controller, Sony has now unleashed their ultimate game playing peripheral, the DualSense Edge. And to be fair, I am not one of those people who get excited about every new controller.
You don't get excited
on the
about
market.
any new controllers.
I really don't. It's not.
Really.
They're just controllers to me. But this one is actually a very big deal.
So why is this one a big deal in comparison to like others?
Well, because most of the time when you're talking about controllers, it's just new colors or maybe texture to the grip. But this one simple word: customization.
Okay.
See, Microsoft fans have been able to enjoy the benefits of a premium controller for years, thanks to the fully customizable Elite controller, while PlayStation players have been forced to either stick with the official Sony controller or settle for some rather dubious third-party controller options that tried and failed horribly to mimic the impressive functionality of the Xbox Elite controller. But the days of undisputed controller supremacy are finally over. Sony has heard our cries, and they've answered with a beautiful piece of technology that will marry all of those new fun enhancements that we get with the DualSense controller, like haptic feedback and adaptive triggers, with all the customizable features of the Elite controller, programmable buttons, replaceable back buttons, and stick caps that you can change out based on how high you want them.
Right.
So it appears that the controller playing field has finally been leveled across these two platforms, and Sony may have actually even maybe gained the edge.
I see what you did there.
Well, because it's called the Edge, and I said gain the edge. So I thought it was clever wordplay. But I see now it's just not as exciting as I thought. Well, when I was thinking about it, it sounded really good in my head.
But then when you said it out loud, it's just like...
It's not, well, when I said it out loud the second time, that's when it really kind of fell apart. So there's still some details that are coming out. We don't have, at least at the time that we're recording this, the launch date and the retail price. I would assume it's going to be moderate. But the news that Sony has finally jumped into the big leagues with a new controller, that's a really big deal. It's been 7 long years for PlayStation gamers since they have been calling out for something that would match what the Xbox Elite controller does for Microsoft
Has it really
fans.
been 7 years?
Yes, and Sony has been silent on that topic this entire time, which was incredibly frustrating because they knew we wanted it, and their competition had proven that such a product was not only possible, but in incredibly high demand. The Elite controller was routinely selling out. Then they released a second version of it, and that sold out constantly. So Sony knew that there was a demand for this. They knew they could monetize it. But for years, we saw nothing from them. Like they were completely ignoring our outcry for something better. And every time that we asked for innovation, they gave us a new color variation of the same old thing. Well,
right,
but so you said you want purple? Like, no. I
I don't want another purple.
I wanted customizable. that would have been nice. You could still make it purple, but no, the color didn't change anything. It still plays the same.
So what do you think changed then?
Well, Sony, out of all the questions that we can't answer yet, like price and release date, we can answer why they finally answered our request for a premium controller. See, the capability to do this was always present for them. It was just a matter of it being the right time and the right place for it to happen. So Sony's president and CEO, Jim Ryan, said that they have been building and preparing the PlayStation 5 console for launch since 2015, which so happens to be the exact same year that Microsoft launched the original Xbox Elite controller. So during that time, Sony was simultaneously creating and releasing content for their current console, which is the PlayStation 4, while also working on developing all of the technology that would define this new console generation, including making this very new and impressive PlayStation 5 DualSense controller with all of its enhancements. So during that process, Sony had a very tough decision to make. Would they respond to Microsoft's Elite controller on the current decaying platform of the PlayStation 4 that was about to be obsolete, or wait for the right time and place to have this occur so it would have the impact that they intended for it to have? Now, sure, Sony could have thrown a bunch of money into making a premium PS4 controller that was identical in functionality to the Elite controller.
Mm-hmm.
And that expensive controller that was only designed for the present instead of the future would now be completely useless for all the gamers who have now upgraded to a PlayStation 5 console system. There's nothing on the PS4 transferred over to the PS5.
Right.
It's a totally
That's
new
right.
controller.
That's right.
So time and place are just as important as power and potential. Not just in the way we play our games, but in the way we play this game of life as well. Now, in this final chapter on pursuing our interrupted dreams from initial discovery into full manifestation, we have one final reality about pursuing our God-given dreams that we need to unpack. Before we get started with that, if you have missed the previous 4 parts of our series, where we dealt with delayed dreams, deferred dreams, and even destroyed dreams, we would encourage you to go ahead and check those out before we get into this final section. Discovering our God-given dreams is a beautiful experience, bringing meaning, purpose, and fulfillment into our lives. But the accomplishment of those dreams may not feel quite so beautiful. Bringing these labors of love to the place where they can shine can feel more like running through a war zone than, a beautiful ballet dance. It's kind of like the opening scene from any of the Call of Duty games, where you just, you start out and you're just frantically running from place to place, explosions going off all around us, trying to find some cover, thick clouds of smoke obscuring our field of vision, and chaos reigning supreme across the battlefield. We may have started off with a nice little plan and an objective. Okay, well, we're gonna try to run to that place right over there. Now all we're trying to do is find a safe place to catch our breath and reevaluate not just what went wrong, but what do I do now? All those grandiose thoughts of pursuing our God-given destiny can quickly disappear in the rear view mirror of a vehicle named necessity. And when we try to pick them back up again, it's easy to believe that we may have missed our opportunity. Perhaps, like myself, we've made some poor decisions. Or maybe, for some of us, the choices of others negatively impacted our path. Maybe we got caught up chasing our own dreams instead of the Lord's. Or maybe we had to wait for those souls who are destined to take this journey with us to actually be ready to join us. Whatever the reason is for us arriving at the place we are in now, there is one thing that all of these paths share in common. The right dream still requires the right time and the right place for it to reach maximum effectiveness. We must take these gifts where they belong. The book of Esther occupies a very interesting period of time in the Old Testament. It's long after David's dynasty and after even the fall of Jerusalem. And we kind of find the Jewish people in a little bit of an interlude. At this time, the Persian Empire was ruling this area. They had just successfully defeated Babylon. And the Lord's chosen people were kind of interspersed throughout the kingdom. After all the slavery, the captivity, the subjugation that they had been exposed to, there was one more chapter that was about to unfold that would bring a very unlikely heroine out of the woodwork and into the heart of a genocidal conspiracy against her people that only she could prevent. And the way this happened is probably one of the most unlikely scenarios possible. Kind of sounds like a Sandra Bullock movie or something. It came from a year-long beauty pageant to determine a new queen. So Maybe they'll make a Miscongeniality 5 or
Oh my
something like that. The
goodness.
story of Esther. I don't know. So this story takes place, now the entire book's named Esther, but it really kicks into high gear starting in Esther chapter 2, where against massive odds, the orphan Esther was not only selected to be part of this beauty pageant process, but she ultimately won, gaining the position of queen and the crown for the Persian Empire. But the Lord did not select her for this position as a reward for her goodness, her kindness, or simply because it was something she may have aspired to as a child. It was because she was chosen for this exact time and this specific place to serve a very critical purpose. Esther, at the time, she couldn't have possibly known all of the political machinations and backstabbing that was going on behind the scenes. But there was a wicked enemy of the Jews, a man named Haman, who was plotting the murder and destruction of the entire Jewish race. And Esther, unbeknownst to her, would be the key to stopping him. Now, before we wrap up her story, there's a funny thing about the dreams and destinies that the Lord has placed into our hearts that we may not have realized. These dreams do not exist in a vacuum. These dreams are just one part of a huge collection of constantly shifting variables that are all flowing in a pattern that we don't have the ability to fully perceive. But that's because we can't see the full picture yet. Like it says in 1 Corinthians 13:12, we only see part of the equation. Similar to the DualSense Edge controller from Sony, it kind of came out of nowhere, long after we had given up on Sony ever making it. There is a larger plan in place that we are a small but important part of. Esther's destiny may have seemed to have been completed by winning the beauty contest as well as the king's heart, but that was merely setting the stage for her actual purpose to be fulfilled. She had the ability to intervene in this horrible situation that was unfolding, but doing so for her involved a very massive personal risk. So in the Persian Empire, approaching the king was forbidden under penalty of death unless you had been previously summoned by him. Kind of strict rules. Like he was, I
Yeah.
feel like maybe they should have just at least came up with, like if they had Microsoft Teams or something like that, or maybe he had, I don't know, a receptionist or something that could let him know if there was appointments coming in. It seems like it was a very difficult way to get a hold of him is all I'm saying. They would have been better off with cell phones. But as Esther was pondering the perilous decision of, well, should I go to him, even though he didn't call me? If I don't, my people might die. But if I go, I'm breaking protocol, I might die. So her adopted father, whenever she was trying to figure out what to do, gave her this very important advice from Esther chapter 4, verse 14. He said, if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Now, I hope you caught that. Her dream was designed to coalesce into a destiny that was all about her future actions in this specific time and this specific place. Esther had been put into this position to answer prayers that weren't even being prayed when she began her journey to the crown. She just got entered into a beauty pageant. We don't even know if she entered of her own free will. But the Lord, who knows all things, placed her into that position before the need for her to be queen was even present, because the time was coming in which he needed her to be in this exact place, to do what only she could do. And she saved her entire people in the process. And as we wrap up our entire series on dreams, the final component of seeing these dreams fulfilled in our lives finally comes into focus. There is a time and a place for the gifts and callings of the Lord to be discovered. And there's often a separate time and place for them to be fully unleashed. As Jesus Christ himself illustrated multiple times during his physical life down here with us, it happens in a time and a place of the Father's choosing, not ours. The DualSense Edge controller that Sony's finally delivering to us kind of felt like it would have been much more convenient on the PlayStation 4 several years ago. I feel like there's a lot of games that I'm like, you know what, I kind of wish I would have had this back then. But Sony knew that providing a solution for that platform was a misguided use of their time and resources. Now, sure, as gamers, we probably would have appreciated it at the time. But Sony was more interested in supporting the future that they were building than the present that they were currently occupying. At the time that the Xbox Elite controller launched in 2015, you have to keep in mind the PlayStation 4 was still kind of in the middle of its life cycle. But Sony wasn't looking at where they were at. They realized that that moment in time was where they were, not where they would be. And after this long, painful 7-year wait, we have finally received our first taste of what Sony has been cooking at the right time and place for it to finally happen. In our lives, we will often find that while the Lord has placed unique dreams and callings into each of our hearts, they still have a specific time and a particular place to be unlocked. Sometimes it's a matter of timing. I mean, think about it. When Abraham was still living at home, he was promised a distant land that would be given to his non-existent descendants. He had no kids. He was 75 years old at the time that God made that promise to him. He didn't have that son that he was promised until he reached the ripe old age of 100, 25 full years later. So, sometimes it's timing. At other times, it might be about the location. Think about when Apostle Paul, he was clearly called to be a missionary, but after trying multiple different paths, he finally was directed by the Lord to the place that he was specifically needed to perform his ministry in Acts 16. He tried entering several different countries, and it said the Holy Spirit prevented us from going here, and he forbid us from going here. He tried multiple times until finally he was like, just go to Macedonia. That's where you need to go. When we don't align our efforts with the Lord's planning and provision, our best efforts will only lead to frustration, delays, and disappointment. Abraham's attempt at fulfilling the dream that God placed into his heart at a time and place of his own choosing instead of the Lord's ended in heartbreak and pain with the birth of Ishmael. And if Sony had released that first ever premium controller on a console that they knew was going to be decommissioned within years, they would have created a complicated Ishmael situation of their own. I mean, think about it. How happy would we be if we had just spent a couple $100s on a controller that now would only work for the next couple of years and would not work on their next console? Right. I have a feeling we'd feel a certain kind of way about that.
Yeah.
So instead, they patiently waited for the right time and place for this gift to launch the Edge, and it appears their patience as well as ours will be rewarded. As we saw with the rise of Esther, the power that she received was provided exactly when and where she needed it, to accomplish a purpose that only she could fulfill. And once she was in the right place at the right time, she made the choice to display the courage to walk into her destiny with confidence, knowing that this was the place and the time that her gift was designed to be displayed. She had a really challenging start as an orphan. She had a very complicated backstory as a Jewish woman in a land that was incredibly hostile to her people. She had no royal training to speak of, but none of that, her lack of qualifications, her challenging background, had any bearing on the role as the vessel that the Lord had selected to deliver her people and fulfill her destiny. And when we find ourselves in a similarly uncomfortable place, where our dreams have not yet fully connected with our current situation, let's absorb the message from Esther that she demonstrated when she found her edge and boldly walked into the throne room to serve the purpose that the Lord had placed on her life. It's the same lesson that Sony demonstrated when they finally announced their Edge controller. There's a specific time and place for the dreams that the Lord has given us to reach fruition. We can't make them happen prematurely or in a different place than what His purposes call for. But once we have aligned our hearts and actions with His timing and position, we can march forward with confidence, knowing that the Lord who commissioned us will bring us to the outcome He has promised. Now, will it take longer than we would prefer? Probably. Will it happen in a place outside of our comfort zone? Absolutely. His ways are higher than our ways for a reason. He sees beyond where we are currently at to the place that he knows where we will be. And he places his dreams into our hearts so that when we pursue him and his will with all of our heart, we will finally find the time and place where they become a reality. We're going to finish with 2 verses today. The first one from Proverbs 19:21, where it says, "Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails." And finally, Philippians 1:6, "Being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ."
We truly hope this has encouraged you today. And if you'd like to connect with us or check out some of our other content, such as our articles, videos, daily devotionals, and gaming streams, we can be found on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.